There might be a bit of a delay. We can't yet get your stream for some reason. It might be connected. I'm going to find a piece. I can't yet connect to your feed for some reason. Not sure. I think what's a minute lag. Keep it running anyway, and I will continue to try. In the meantime, are you appearing on the live feed?
I am. Cool. Is sound being picked up there?
It sounds being picked up.
It's just slides that aren't showing up.
Huh?
It's just slides that aren't showing up.
Yeah, slides on.
We can share the slides into the Facebook group.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, so what I've got, what I can do, give me a moment. If I go to, yeah, that might be best. Give me 2 minutes. I'm going to try connecting to the LAN.
Cool.
Yeah. If you email me the program, I might have time to create a title.
We have this. There's nothing useful on that. Do not trim windows. He's upstairs. You built the house. Hey, you may have to speak up actually because you don't get the microphone. The live stream, because you're so close to the camera, the audio will be. But we should stand up.
Is it all going to be roaming?
Are we taking the mic there when the panel starts?
We haven't got the mic connected yet. I'm going to see if I can get the mixer test.
I need the camera. I'll be taking the camera there where
Is there going to be a panel? We'll move it then. So, do you know, so it's going to be speakers and talent?
You should
basically just keep my name.
oh, you're fully sure.
Wait, with everybody.
I'll move it there.
Okay, yeah. Don't worry. It's like that.
Live stream's not offline.
It just starts. I just start.
It looks like LinkedIn. What's the ETA?
Well, I mean, like, we're ready to go. Like, it's streaming. It's just, give me another 10 minutes, I can double the resolution. But if you want to go,
If you can have one pointing at slides. Sweet, is that working?
we'll find out.
Awesome, cool. We can just kick off and then fix it as it goes along. Cool, awesome. Ben, if you can share you sent me the link
sent it to you.
on Facebook, right?
Pardon?
You sent me the link on Facebook, I'll share
I
it.
think that, yeah, I think that's going to work.
Yes, good. Good evening, everybody. Sorry, I don't have a mic, so it's going to be like this kind of Shakespearean tonight. Hello, humans. Welcome to AI and Politics, edition Can Facebook Win Elections? My name is Anna Gatt. I will be your host tonight. I'm the founder of Lightclock and kind of generally a big fan of intelligence, regardless of the preceding adjective. They are tracking our user choices, preferences, likes, shares of their website as well. As I think that's kind of not a secret that there is a current boom in AI development and funding. So there's some worry that this will very soon reflect in how algorithms are pandering and shaping our preferences, and we will kind of try to find out to what degree is our paranoia warranted. We have amazing speakers tonight, Louis, Danielle, and Lee, who will be looking at this problem from 3 different angles, that of analysis, practice, and academic psychology. To kind of kick off the event, I'm introducing the 2 organizers, Sophie and Shad, who will be talking about the structure a little bit and what to expect apart from the tropical climate. Thank you.
Hey guys, I'm Shaz. This is Sophie. This is the 4th edition of AI Politics. Last month we missed one. Sorry about that for our fanboys and fangirls. So the topic today is Can Facebook Win Elections? The format of the event is we will have one speaker after the other. So save your questions, and then we'll have a panel where Anna will lead and host.
Other bits of information, we have beer in the fridge. Most of you have probably found it already, but don't forget to take that. So the key thing Shad's already said about the questions, we're hoping for a really interactive audience-driven discussion. So and the last thing, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our speakers, and I hope you enjoy the event.
Hello everybody. Can everybody hear me? Is probably the first thing. Yes? Good. A bit louder. Okay, I'll shout. So this is my first time speaking at an event. I'm Louis Nightweb, so go easy on me. But I'm here to tell you a bit about a project that I co-founded with my friend Sam Jeffers. It's called Who Targets Me, and we're tracking political Facebook advertising this election and possibly in future elections to come. There we go. So the problem. It's true that advertising has emerged as the kind of the preferential medium for campaigns to reach voters through all platforms. But I think Facebook has emerged as the king of advertising. It's incredibly affordable. You know, any private citizen can, for a few quid, reach thousands of people, and they will ask for basically no verification of your profile, and you'll get approved within a couple of hours. You can run all kinds of complex A/B testing that's, you know, driven by automated marketing. So I might put out 2 messages, and, you know, the one that gets the most likes and shares will automatically be continued. And it's like A/B testing on steroids, I think, is a nice way to describe it. So to hammer the point, here's a nice infographic chart that I didn't make on Facebook's advertising profits, and this kind of demonstrates why this is such a new issue. Because Facebook's advertising revenues have doubled in the last year. So, you know, that's why this is an important issue, and that's kind of why the regulators, I think, to a certain extent, haven't caught up. So, under most circumstances, this would be fine. Most advertising, you know, is okay to run through Facebook, but I think political advertising needs a slightly different framework. This is mainly due to the lack of regulation that has been applied to digital advertising. For example, TV adverts, as most of you will know, are advertising itself many times, but that's counted as digital campaign spend. But there's current investigations by the ICO that got launched, I think, 2 weeks ago into that. So we're making progress. So what is a dark ad? I'm sure most of you know, but just to hammer the point, a dark ad is not when you just boost a post on Facebook. A dark ad can only be seen by the audience that you target to. So, for example, I can see the adverts that you're I can't see the adverts that you're seeing, and you can't see the adverts that I'm seeing. But probably more worryingly is the fact that the government and the Electoral Commission and the Information Commissioner's Office can't see anybody's adverts. So yeah, I hope that explains that. That's just an example of one of the ads that we've been seeing. So I think if most people are familiar with this big bus. Vote Leave came out and said after the referendum that they spent 98% of their budget on Facebook advertising, but yet most of the media reports were on this big red bus, which fit into the other 2% of advertising. That was mainly because you can't actually audit and analyze dark ads. There just isn't the data to do it. There is no repository where a journalist can go through and pick out all the dodgy facts, like 350 million, and go through and make sure that that is correct. So that's our goal, is to create that data set that other people can do professional research and do real-time reporting on. So after identifying this as a problem, our solution to it was to build a desktop browser extension. So you as a user would provide basic information about your demographics, so your age, your gender, your location, and this would basically, in the background, every time you visit Facebook, you scroll down, you see an advert, but there's a script running in the background that picks out the advert and works out this is the headline, these are the videos that are being shown, this is the image, and it sends it to our servers, and we work out, is it political or not political? And if it is political, we then go on to categorize it as, what party is it from? Is this a campaign group? Is this, far right? Is this, far left? And then we combine the ad data with the demographic data that you provide, and we work out which groups are being targeted, which minorities are being targeted with specific messages. Is a particular town in Wales being targeted with messages about support the Marines, or are fishermen around the coast being given a particularly strange message? And so, we have to accept that there are certain limitations to this approach. The biggest one is that 80% of Facebook's advertising revenue comes from mobile, and this is a huge problem for us because our extension is just on desktop. But feasibly, it's impossible. It's infeasible, perhaps, to say, to track mobile advertising. We would have to rely on people to take screenshots of the adverts, send them in. We would then have to write out, who was the advertiser, what was the advert. You just can't do it at scale. To give you an idea of the kind of scale that we're getting at the moment, we're getting 50 to 60,000 impressions of adverts submitted every single day. So, if we were to try and do the same for mobile, it just couldn't happen. And the other limitation, of course, is are our users a bunch of communists? Well, luckily there are other indicators of advert reach, such as the number of likes, the number of comments, the number of shares, and the number of video views. So we've cross-checked these numbers, and we've been able to establish that we're in the right ballpark. Essentially, we're not we've got a fairly large representation of people saying that they're receiving adverts from the Green Party, which does go to show that our sample is a bit skewed, but we're not wildly out, and we're definitely proving that adverts do exist. So yeah. And this is what we built. This is the extension to some extent. There's a form before this where you fill it all out, but it is super simple. It just tells you your personal statistics, and it tells you your national statistics, and we're breaking it down soon into England and your constituency. But we get to see the aggregate of the data. That's the really powerful part. And then we get to share that with great journalists and great researchers, and they can work out what are the recommendations to take forward. So these are some of our key stats. So we've had 1.4 million adverts. And by the way, we started 2 days after the election was announced. We've had 1.4 million ads reported to us, of which 2% were party political, of which a further 2% were from candidates, so MPs, and campaign groups like More United, Best for Britain, etc. And we had as of the time of writing this PowerPoint, we had 7.3 thousand volunteers, and that's kind of growing every day. We had 38 Degrees put it out to their mailing list today, so it's growing at a good rate. And of those adverts, we kind of funneled it down to 954 party ads, so quite a large amount. And we partnered with the London School of Economics and the Bureau of Investigative Journalists, and they've been really good in supplying resources, in providing basically kids to code the data and look at the data. But yeah, they've put out a lot of the stories. So what can we say? Our part of the job is mainly to create the data set and allow other people to make the analysis from. But we can certainly say that right at the start, young people were being targeted by the Labour Party with get out the vote messages, and we had literally 0 messages from the Tory party, which read what you will, that's pretty expected, I think. And rather than focusing on policy issues, a huge proportion of the Tory ads attack Jeremy Corbyn directly. The Liberal Democrats are running the biggest A/B style test that we've seen from any of the parties by about twofold. They are sending people messages like sign up to my petition about, and then the last word will change. So you've got maybe Brexit, or sign up to my petition about the NHS, or sign up to my petition about the Marines, and they'll literally iterate that around the country and work out which messages are resonating with which particular constituents. And so it begs the question: are people writing their manifestos based on what is popular? Is this transparent? Is this a good way to be doing politics? So yeah, that's just from very, very early analysis. And you can see this is a graph of our unique ads that we've seen over the last couple of days. You see the Liberal Democrats, although they're not putting the most money behind it, they are running the most variations of advertising. So clearly quite clued up, and I'm not sure what company they're using, but they're doing a lot of testing. So these are some of the articles that have come out of the data. Conservatives launch online offensive against Corbyn. Will dark ads on Facebook really swing the 2017 general election? Which parties are targeting you? Seeing conservative ads, that's because you've been profiled as a Tory voter. Gina Miller targets voters with tailored Facebook ads. That was one where, so Gina Miller heads up the Best for Britain campaign, and they were basically sending 50-year-olds messages of a picture of a 50-year-old telling their kind of human story, and pictures of a 20-year-old were sent to 20-year-olds with human stories. So they were using the Facebook targeting to relate to their audience. Tories target Jeremy. This has been quite popular, quite a popular story in the last couple of days. The Tories launching attack ads on Facebook. This was covered quite prominently this morning by the BBC and lots of other news outlets. Cambridge Analytica, fun. So, is it bullshit? Probably. So, quite a lot of our analysis, a lot of people want us to do, psychometric analysis. There's a lot of things we can do. We can analyze the messaging, make sure it's not fake news. But another thing we can do is determine, are people targeting based on the big 5 personality traits? That's like the key thing that people want to do. So to give you an idea, I'm sure a lot of you know about the big 5, but this is just a very quick overview. So the big 5 personality traits are, you can reduce everybody to these 5 variables: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. And you can use these to your advantage because you can play on people's fears. So, for example, if I calculated that you were a neurotic person, I might send you a message that has a video of your house getting burgled, and you'd be like, oh shit, my house is getting burgled, I'm going to vote for this party. So, that's kind of crude example of it, but you can start to play on people's fears rather than appealing to people with your policies. So it's a strange way of doing politics. Just before I go on to that, so basically, it's difficult to work out. This kind of psychometric analysis will probably happen after the election, just because we need to ask a lot of people to come back and give us a bit more data about themselves, so we can work out exactly what variables the campaigns were using to target on and to create groups based on. So what's next? Our research partners at the LSE will be doing some deeper analysis on the data set. We're working with Damien Tambini, who advised the government on party political broadcast back in 2003, and is generally, I think we're in a really good position to get some kind of increased regulation for the next general election. The Information Commissioner's Office has already launched an investigation into big data's use in election, in particular the spending implications, like, is foreign money being used to drive the data that is powering the campaigns this election? Or should that be declared as party spend? We've definitely seen that. So, for example, Tory Party HQ is funding their local candidates' use of big data, and that's an example of should that be declared as national spend or local spend. So it breaks down into a lot of problems, and the truth is that this is such a grey area that even the regulator, the regulators, it's up to them to make this clear, and I don't think they have yet. That was meant to be much higher resolution. Sure. It's a lovely thing. So there's always an election having somewhere. This is basically a quick clipping from Wikipedia explaining all of the upcoming elections in Europe. So we plan to take this kind of in the short term to Germany. We're going to cover the federal elections, then Italy. Then I had somebody get in contact from Kosovo, some pro-democracy group there. We could just keep doing this basically until Facebook gets tired of us and makes the changes, or the European Commission gets bored of us and makes the changes, or somebody makes the changes that make this redundant. But we're going to, massive interest globally. Brazil, Japan, lots of people want this. And I think if we're finding interesting stories in Britain, you can imagine what it's like in countries with a less stable government and a less stable democracy. So the best might still be to come. So opportunities for AI. I'm very aware that this event is called AI in Politics. I feel like I need to talk a little bit about AI. So we're currently working with this firm called Centisum, who help us out with some natural language processing, sentiment analysis, that kind of stuff. It involves running the text parts of the advert through their natural language processing engine. And so what we can do with that, and feature analysis engine. So what we can do, we can take a phrase like, I hate Theresa May, and then we can pick out the features like Theresa May, and then we can pick out the sentiment like hate, and we can score it. So we can say on a score of 0 to 5, that was probably like a 2. You really dislike this feature. And so that helps us at scale work out what is going on in the advertising. Because as I said before, 50 to 60,000 adverts a day and growing every day is just impossible for a human to go through and make those kinds of decisions. This is a great application for AI to kind of reverse engineer other AI and to really fight big data with big data. So another piece of potential research could be to run the comments through. That would be pretty interesting, kind of try to gauge what the people are thinking about elections. I think this has been done before, and people think that it's unreliable. But it's something we could do. There's also quite an intensive, time-intensive thing we could do, which is optical character recognition. I guess this is kind of a use of AI to go through the images and detect, maybe faces, or to go through and read the text out of images. That's something that we haven't done yet, just because there's been no time to do it. But if anybody's an expert on that, hit me up. And the volume of data is just such that it would be pretty futile to do any kind of psychometric analysis without building a piece of software that was specially made for this job. You would have a table, perhaps, of advert data, a table of psychometric data, and you'd need an engine to go through and pick out the correlations. Like, okay, all the people earning under £20,000 in Swansea were sent this message, and then bam, you've got the evidence to, write that story. And that's something we're very keen to do, but we just haven't had the time to do yet. This will be in the follow-up after the election, probably. And yeah, we're open to new ideas. I think these are the ones that I thought of, and there's probably a million more that people in AI have thought of, so, get in touch. So, just on a technical note, for anybody that's wondering, so these are the variables that we capture. So we get, basic user demographics, age, gender, location. Advert data includes text, images, videos, timestamps, and the reaction data includes comments, shares, likes, ha-has. And we can extend this to Twitter, Instagram, any other thing really. And it extends beyond political advertising too. It's also, I like to think of it as a future advert watchdog. So you could track whether companies that advertise slugging products are advertising to young women and stuff like that, like the whole Beachbody Ready thing. If there was a campaign of that online, I like to think that we would be able to track that and stop that. So yeah, that's all, folks.
That's not the beginning of the presentation. Yeah. Hello everyone. Guys, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really great to have the opportunity to show some of the stuff I'm doing. And Louis, if that's your first presentation, then maybe, great. I mean, you look everything forever, so really respect. So just to make sure, which one is the right? So a bit about the company I co-founded. The company is called IOTA. What we're doing mainly is using AI and natural language processing in order to research human psychology, human behavior, and culture. So that's what we're doing. There's two branches to the company. One is commercial, so we work with clients like Samsung, the lottery, Lloyd's, those guys. But we also have an experimental branch where we're doing a lot of cool stuff because we want to, right? Out of the experimental branch, so far we've launched actually 2 different companies. One is based in Nairobi, and what we do there is recruitment sciences. So we create cognitive model in order to match people to the right job in frontier markets. Another company is now being developed in the US. It's called Ovary, and it deals with women health, generally speaking. So more on that later. Now, one of the projects we've been working on for a while now is called Perspectives. And I just want to tell you a bit more about what we've been doing there, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and where we're going next. So we started it about more than a year ago. It would have been quicker if it was commercial, but because it's not, so we're taking our time. And the main reason why we started it is because already at the time it looked like something was happening, generally speaking, in the political landscape in the West. So that was before the Brexit. The Pew Research has been running every few years a questionnaire that is trying to find out how separate the right and the left is from one another, and the answer is it's not looking really great. So it used to be that people had different opinions, but then there was some space in the middle to discuss, and then as we move, more and more toward the present time, Democrats and Republicans in the US, but also, I think, very similarly in other countries, are camping on the position, and there's less and less space in the middle for conversation, which is why potentially populism happen, and why, generally speaking, we all hate each other instead of having a nice conversation. So that's one of the reasons where we thought, yeah, well, this is happening, we should probably do something about it. The other reason is the really bad state of trust in media by most of the population. This is specifically from Gallup. This is to with the US population, but there's similar stats for other countries. TV seems to be doing fine. It depends on the country, but generally speaking, it's not looking really great. So that's the state of the political spectrum. What can you do? So if there's a polarization, it means there's 2 sides to something. Potentially, a possibility in order to solve the situation would be to have more than 2 sides, right? So instead of having right and left, you have a bunch of stuff, and because there's a bunch of stuff, they're not necessarily opposite, and therefore some guy here might have to talk to someone there because it's not exactly as you, and maybe there's just like more space to discuss, right? On that, I see that you're making a face. So I just want to add a little, because it's not necessarily clear. There's a thing in psychology called grounding. It's a very reptilian cognitive thing we all have. And what it does is that if we already decide on an opinion, it's far easier to confirm this opinion than to just go and accept a completely different opinion. I mean, the energy that we need to have in order to do that movement is just huge, and therefore we'll confirm the kind of stuff that we already know about, and we will kind of not really make the effort to go and understand the stuff that we don't know about, that we don't want to hear about, etc. And therefore, if you go to someone with an idea that's completely opposed to the one he's having mentioned at the beginning, the potential that you're actually going to convince this person is like not really strong. But if you have an idea that's kind of close, but not exactly, it's kind of slightly different, then the possibility that someone will accept your opinion. Oh, sorry, yeah. No, it's fine. Yeah, that's
We
good.
can turn it back on if it gets too hot.
Right, so to summarize so far, there's political polarization, it sucks, there's no trust in media, there's an idea that if you believe in something already, it's easier to confirm what you believe than to go and believe something completely different. Therefore, in order to solve this problem of political polarization, one of the possibilities might be to not go and try to convince someone that's completely opposite to your idea, but someone that's kind of close, right? So that was the main premise of this idea. So we used, amongst other, a bunch of political theory in it. There's this one guy, I recommend this book, it's very easy to read. It's called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. So this guy has a theory that kind of goes into that direction. He says, well, right and left, not really what's happening anymore. What we have is actually a range of spectrums on which you can have different positions. So I'll just give you a few of those spectrums. One is kindness versus toughness. So imagine, Labour might be more on the kind side, Tories, it's like, that's the way it is, deal with it. Idealism versus pragmatism. I want a better word. I want to do stuff that exists in my life. Individual liberties versus effective authority. The world is shit, we need a strong man to just put stuff right into place. Loyalty to group versus universalism. I want a better world for everybody. I want a better world for everybody, but kind of my family comes first, and my extended family, right? Tradition versus irreverence. So sure, it's interesting to have new ideas, but that's the way we've always done it, and it's worked quite well. So, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. And then there's like, it's all shit, let's start from the beginning, on shit, right? So that's the one. And the last one is, I would say, decency and purity versus hedonism. So, okay, let's not allow women to, dress with mini skirts. Let's not eat meat. Let's not pollute. Or fuck everything, let's drink a lot and do whatever, right? So now, if you look at all of those spectrums, it kind of draws an interesting picture of what actually have a political identity means. So just to give you an example of how those combinations might work, you might think that traditional people are completely opposed to, other people. Let's just make a few of those games, right? So, libertarian, probably tough, probably idealistic, very much for individual liberties, right? We can discuss later. So, Labour Party in the UK, kind of idealistic, I suppose. Probably for a strong authority, the leader. Very decent. Corbyn is a teetotaler that, is a vegan and drive a bike. Right? Now, he's not the only one to be decent. Religious party, if there were some like that in the UK, would actually agree with him. They would be on the same spectrum as Corbyn for some of his ideas, right? And then, etc. So it means there's not a clear opposition of one against the other. Some ideas of some people actually belong together, although intuitively you might not feel like you belong to the same group. So Greens, clean, etc., my opinion, works very well with religious parties. They have the same idea. Kindness, work with religious group, work with Labour. Toughness, well, the Tories basically cover everything, so so combining those different ideas might be an interesting potential way to stop this really extreme polarization that's going on at the moment. So that was the idea of this project. check out this guy. By the way, I changed the names. I mean, he called things another name, but it's just too difficult to articulate, so I decided to call them differently. So we went and did a product idea, as we often do in our lab, called Perspective. That's a mock-up, so sorry for the, it's not really pretty. The idea is the following. You search a journalist, a topic, whatever, and here it is. You get to this lady over there. Those are the stuff that she's been talking about recently. Here you get an article, for example, about Corinne. And then you get an analysis in real time of what are the main things that are happening in this article along those height lines that I just described. So it tells you, well, the way she's talking, it's kind of, it has to do with group identity. It's quite pragmatic. It's for like authority, and it's relatively empathetic, right? Then you can go and see all the other topics that she's talking about here. So when she talks about labor, this lady, for example, would have that kind of attitude. And when I say attitude, I mean elements of political identity, right? So here's an example. You can go to one of the, I just did a screenshot of like the path you would take. So you go to the first article right there. You have to install a plugin, you install a plugin. And then the article is being analyzed. You see what's happening there, and then you see at the end, that was the idea, this system will just offer you to look at something similar, but a little bit different to what you just saw. Not completely different, something that has the same kind of tonality. It's also kind of idealistic, it's also for kind of effective authority, but it really is completely tough and unkind, and it doesn't care about it, right? So that's what we're doing. And here we have a bunch of articles. So that would be like also a browser add-on. So yeah, you have like some definition here. What does it mean, effective authority and pragmatism? It's not obvious to everybody. And then once a week, you would get a nice mail that says, well, those are all the articles that you've read this week. That's the kind of stuff that you're interested in. And not yet. And you would get like a nice summary and then a recommendation with, well, that's what you've read, why don't you try those things? It's not really far off the tree, it's just close enough for you to be interested, but it's not far enough to get you really pissed, right? So that's what we did, and then we did some shout out, and we did a lot of research on that, and we showed that to people, and we did some panel research, and then we got to some conclusions. So what happened between the time when we started doing this product until now is the Brexit and then Trump. So the Brexit, seemed like a funny possibility, but after the Brexit, suddenly Trump became quite a clear possibility, and now we all crushed the debt and we don't know what to do with those sides. So what we found out is the following. People don't like to be told. A lot of the stuff that's being produced by people in this room has to do with explaining to the other side that obviously didn't understand well the situation, that they should be thinking differently for their own good, and if they don't, it's probably because something happened to them one way or another. I don't know, they're probably stupid, racist, fascist, child killers, whatever it is. It's something is wrong with them, and if we only tell them slowly what effective authority might be, what the definition of liberalism really means, then surely they will understand and join the rank of the decent, thoughtful, and rational people that vote for the right person. Well, that really is annoying to 50% of the population. They just hate being told that. You know what? They hate being told. They really hate it. And the more we talk to liberal people, the more they like the idea. If we talk to anyone else, usually it's only one person, because, echo bubble, how many other people do we know already? Whomever I'm talking to who doesn't have the same idea, I'm very happy that there's not more of them, because I would get lynched right away for my arrogant attitude. It's probably true. In other terms, the whole idea of trying to teach people that they're stupid and they should change is probably not the right strategy, right? So that's one of the things that we learned. And therefore, we decided to stop doing that. There's a lot of noise around, noise. There's a lot of discussion around fact-checking and fake news, etc. I just want to propose this possibility that facts is an ideology. Half of the population doesn't really care about fact, not because they're stupid, because they think that it's an attack against them personally by a bunch of super educated, arrogant people who think they know better and they will tell them how to behave. It's really potentially not going to work ever. So checking more facts are just like, it's just like preaching to the choir, right? It's a new ideological movement. If there's a new ideological movement, the factism, let's call it factism, then surely there's also another ideological movement which is probably going in another direction, and that would be, I don't know, passionatism, or like excitationism, or something like that. So, emotionalism. Yeah, something, yeah, emotionalism sounds a bit overused, but yeah, something like, you know, heartbreakinism, I mean. So, look, a lot of what we're doing actually has to do with text analysis. I think that there's really a problem in terms of how we define language. The language of Trump is a language of emotion. It doesn't mean that, you know, other people are not emotional. It means that the more we decide that the rational, decent people are using fact, the more we're pushing other people to be like crazy, emotional, whatever. We're going to lose holding on emotion. It's going to become a political thing. So one side is going to have the facts and the other side is going to have the emotion. The emotions are going to win. It's just, I mean, I don't even need to explain. It's just intuitively, because we do still have some emotions. We know that's going to happen. So, now, going back to how we analyze that in terms of psychology, I just wanted to note that actually I did a project for 1 year with the Cambridge Psychometric Center. I can confirm it's probably bullshit. And the study of the different sides of political psychology, I think, teaches us a lot about why we're trying to study political psychology. And over time, I'm taking less and less side because I love everybody and everybody's so interesting. But I know that in this room, we tend to kind of do things in a certain way and see the world in a certain way. It has a lot to do with the fact that we assume that the way people speak means something about, I don't know, them. It's just a political thing. So now emotions and fact, just think about this a little bit, could be two new political parties. What do we know about that? What do we do? So we are working on this next version of this product. I guess maybe in 2 or 3 AI and politics we might present the results, but I can tell you already that it's not rational at all. So yeah, thanks.
Clarify what we have evidence for, what we don't have evidence for. And the brief I was given for this was particularly thinking about this psychological profiling on using social media and to the extent to which political parties can really use psychological profiling to target messaging to us. And if they can do that, what effect might that have? Before I do that, I feel as someone interested in political psychology, I feel quite concerned about the potential for this. And I just want to sort of cherry pick some findings from political psychology that might help make you worried about this. And one of these, for example, is just how little people know about what they're voting about. So the Hansard Society run this audit of political engagement every year that they've done for the last 14 years, and every now and then they do quizzes in it, and they have asked people, are British members of the European Parliament directly elected by British voters? In 2013, only 43% of people knew that this was the case. And back in the past, the levels are pretty much just as bad. So really we're dealing with voters who actually know very little about what they're voting about, at least for a large majority. It's also clear, and this is sort of very congruent with what Daniela was saying, that a lot of politics has something to do with the values that we hold. And it's really nice evidence for this looks at predictors of voting in Brexit. And one that was very clear was people's support for the death penalty. So it turned out that whether you support the death penalty or not was a huge predictor of voting leave in the EU referendum. And a much higher predictor than many other things that you might expect would be logical predictors of voting leave. Oh, I should mention, I've tweeted a link to my slides, and there are hyperlinks to all the studies that I'm referencing here, so don't feel you need to take notes. Another finding in political psychology, which just continues to astonish me but continues getting replicated, is that if you ask people which of these faces is more competent, people have a sort of inclination on this, and people tend to say one is more competent than the other, and this predicts election results all over the world. Tends to be more sort of congressional or Senate elections, but all over the world this finding has been replicated. So really voters are doing some things which clearly aren't just purely rational. So we have a lot of psychological biases that we bring to the political process, and there's some plausibility that political campaigns and social media, particularly via the use of social media, might exploit some of these psychological biases. Now, this isn't directly pertinent to the issue we're discussing here, which is whether political parties can send sort of biased messages to different voters on social media, but I wanted to mention one study about the influence of Facebook on voting, which highlights something we do know about the influence Facebook can have, which is that they sent two different messages to US voters in a midterm congressional election, either just at the top of their newsfeed on the day of the election, they offered them this button they could press saying, "I voted," or they saw a version of this button where they also saw which of their friends had already clicked this button. It turns out if you see this message with your friends, and in particular if they're close friends, they showed that people who saw that message would be more likely to turn out and vote. The effect size was quite small, but when you're looking at 61 million people, this could be the most conservative estimate was that this increased turnout by 60,000 voters. So, this is one of the published papers in the literature for which we have very clear evidence that Facebook can influence our voting behavior. Can it bias different voters towards different parties, and can we psychologically profile voters to specifically target messages to them? So this is where we come back to something that Louis and Daniela have already hinted at, which is the importance of this Big Five personality profile. And this is research from 2010 looking at the Big Five personality profile and also income and education. Now, I'm not going to go into much detail about this personality profile, but it's just a way of characterizing individual differences in our personality, and it has dimensions like conscientiousness, openness, agreeableness, stability, and extroversion. It just so happens that how you rate yourself on things like conscientiousness and openness is a very good predictor of whether you will identify as liberal or conservative, both on economic and social ways of defining that. In particular, openness is a really big predictor, even more so than sort of more demographic things like income or education. So this was really part of the starting point for thinking that if we know people's Big Five personality profile, we might be able to guess how they're going to vote. Now, the plausibility for this was further enhanced by studies at the Cambridge Psychometric Centre, where Kosinski and colleagues worked out that they could identify things like how open people are to new experiences just by looking at their activity on social media. And this indicates that the more likes someone makes, the more accurately they could characterize their Big Five personality profile, and in particular they were particularly good at predicting people's levels of openness. Now, they sort of only get up to just under 50%, so that's not necessarily so impressive, but they've continually been refining this algorithm, and in 2015 they published a paper highlighting that this algorithm was better at guessing your personality profile than close friends. So if you've made at least 100 likes on social media, this algorithm can guess your Big Five personality profile better than a friend. So this is really quite an impressive ability to work out your Big Five personality profile just by looking at what you're doing on social media. So that's known, and that's reliably the case. We can diagnose people's personality profile from their social media activity, and there is a predictive relationship between people's personality profile and how they vote or identify as liberal or conservative. Now then, there's this huge move from that research to the idea that Cambridge Analytica were able to exploit this research in targeting campaign material, first in the Trump versus Cruz election, then in the Trump versus Hillary election, and using this in the Brexit election. I have my suspicions about whether this is really effective or not, what they're doing, but the thing that frustrates me the most is that we just don't have the evidence to know. And I think that's one of the most problematic aspects of this. I mean, what a lot of people say is that, this analysis software was first used in Trump versus Cruz, and clearly that wasn't effective because they were being funded by the Cruz campaign originally. They only switched sides partway through after Cruz had lost. And Trump clearly beat Cruz, even though he was using all this software. But actually, as a psychologist, it's not clear what sort of psychological profiling you would use to differentiate Trump voters versus Cruz voters. Whereas liberals or conservatives, actually there's a lot of psychological research telling us how to differentiate those sorts of voters. So I don't think that's a good counter-argument. Now, Trump versus Hillary, I don't know for sure the sort of Big Five personality profile of Trump supporters and Hillary supporters, and I haven't seen good data on that yet. But the data that I have seen for Brexit so far is certainly consistent with the idea that the predicted relationships are as expected. So people who are lower on openness are more likely to vote leave, people who are higher on conscientiousness are more likely to vote leave, and people who are slightly higher on neuroticism are more likely to vote remain. So the big predictors we would have expected between voting leave and remain and their Big Five personality profile, these are true. So if Cambridge Analytica had been exploiting these differences in personality profiling to target voters, they could have potentially been effective. But again, without Louis' great contribution, this is something that in the past we didn't know, or we couldn't know or test. So what's the reality of the psychological basis for this technology? Well, I think to some extent voters can be identified by their activity online. And this is becoming increasingly more and more clear, actually, that there are more and more data sources you can use for this sort of thing. So even the type of books that you like on Amazon are predictive of how likely you are to vote one way or the other. Or how many times you swear on Twitter. I'm afraid if you're liberal, you're a bit more likely to swear more often. It has to do with having a lower rating on conscientiousness. So we can identify voters, but then the real big question is what's actually the effect of targeting campaign material to different voters? Can we actually effectively identify someone and say, okay, you're high on openness, you're low on conscientiousness, can we effectively target campaign material to you? And there are sort of two strategies we might do in doing that. For people who we think are on our side, we might target information to them or campaign material to them which will be effective. For people who aren't on our side, we might kind of try and discourage them, and in particular we might try and discourage them from registering to vote in the first place. Now, this is all very frustrating because as an academic, there just isn't good evidence for, this is exactly why Louis' data is going to be great, because we'll actually be able to test some of these things as to, whether these different campaign adverts have been directly targeted towards different people and whether they may or may not have been effective. But whether they could in principle be effective, it seems to me psychologically plausible that they could be effective. And this is partly because there are other things we know about how people divide on the left and the right that could be effective in this. So, as Danielle already hinted, in terms of Jonathan Haidt's theory of the book The Righteous Mind, liberals and conservatives tend to differ in the moral foundations that they emphasize. So people on the right, conservatives, tend to care more about things like in-group loyalty. So when Trump says something like "Make America Great Again," or when people respond to Corbyn not singing the national anthem, for lots of liberals, this might be quite neutral. This might not, register on their sort of moral radar. But for someone on the right, for someone who's more of a conservative, this violation of in-group loyalty, this not conforming to the norms of our nation, not singing the national anthem, this could be quite a serious issue. So this is the sort of thing that if I was on the Conservative Party, I would be trying to sort of play on this sense of in-group loyalty by the messaging that I was conveying. One of the other things we know on the left or the right is that people who identify on the right tend to be a little bit more sensitive to threat. So if you show someone on the right a sort of threatening or fearful image, like this nice face over here, you'll get a slightly higher galvanic skin response from someone on the right than on the left. So there is a slightly higher threat sensitivity on the right. And it's recently been shown that this also goes along with a slight increase in susceptibility to sort of negative fake news which sort of says something negative. So again, if I was on the right and I wanted to sort of speak to my base, I'd be talking about threats. I'd be playing on sort of fear. Now this, to me, I suspect this is one of the reasons why the Conservative Party at the moment are making these links between Corbyn and the IRA, because it very much undermines this sense of sort of in-group loyalty on behalf of Corbyn. I also, actually just as I was preparing this talk, I got a sponsored message from the Cambridge Conservative Party, where you see they're playing on some of these things. You're playing on this threat of more debt, higher taxes, economic chaos. Don't risk it. It's very much speaking directly to the sort of psychological profile of someone on the right. But they targeted this to me, and I'm not on the right, and I've used Cambridge Analytica's, not Cambridge Analytica's, the Cambridge Psychometric Centre Psychological Profiling, and if you look at my Facebook, it clearly predicts that I'm a liberal. So it doesn't seem like Cambridge, like the Conservatives, are actually targeting this messaging to particular people. That's my suspicion so far.
Are you sure? Are you sure you're that liberal? Maybe they know something about you.
They know you're in a marginal, right?
Maybe. Not one that they're going to win. But all they have to go on is my social media activity. And my social media activity, at least using the algorithms that the Cambridge Psychometric Centre used, clearly put me as being liberal. Now, on the other side, what you might want to do is find people who are not likely to vote for you and try and deter them from voting. So there's been some suggestion of this that there's this article in The Guardian looking at, there were some people trying to encourage young people to vote in North Wales, and they suddenly found just before the voter registration deadline it became a lot more expensive to pay for ads to try and encourage these people to register to vote. And one of the reasons it became more expensive to pay for ads is because they were competing with other people who were trying to advertise to these people, and it seemed to be that it was the Conservatives. And so the Conservatives were sending messages to young voters in this area that was just before the voter registration deadline. So it seems a bit suspect there. But are they using psychological profiling to do this? I don't know, and probably not, because one of the things we know about this election is that age is a huge predictor of voting Labour or Conservative. So just by targeting younger voters, they could effectively target, the people that they might want to discourage from registering to vote. So can psychological profiling be used to identify voters? I think there's evidence that that is the case. Can campaign material be effectively tailored to voters based on their psychological profile? I think there are reasons to think this is plausible, but we lack evidence. And it's unclear whether this psychological targeting really is happening. I mean, one of the arguments for this in the Trump election is that Trump registered sort of 170,000 different versions of different adverts. The idea that he was really sending different adverts to different voters. But whether or not this is really something that's happening or not, there's really not clear evidence for. Okay, I'll finish there.
Sweet. and then it's reach.
Oh, and the mic, thank you. Hello everybody again. Wow, I don't know if I'm really reassured by the fact that all this was just invented by advertisers. Great. I actually took the Cambridge Analytica test. You can see what it says about you. And it told me, based on its incredibly sophisticated algorithm that wrote to us Brexit and Trump and not Marine Le Pen, that I'm a middle-aged gay man who's very introverted. And I was a bit like, wow. And then I thought, maybe I vote like one. And then it started making sense. I think it was because in 2007 I really liked the film No Country for Old Men, and that had like a ripple effect on my life. Before we start with the questions, may I be cheeky enough to ask two straight away, and maybe just pass the mic. So one is, should we campaign for a UN type of neutral global body of representatives to control the morals of digital advertisers? That's one. You can also think about it and cast your votes. And so the whole thing about, you know, you guys mentioned, wow, it's jazz. So to you guys who spend your lives analyzing people as a job, were Brexit and Trump predictable from either an emotional or a professional point of view? And were you or were you not surprised that in France somehow, or obviously, this did not happen? I will start with Danielle.
So, would you like me to address those two questions at once, or should we like a tour?
You shoot one and then
It's
the other.
just already so.
All right. So let's start with the first one. Do we need a body, a regulatory body that checks the morals of advertisers? No. Okay. Now, more extensively, who will be on that body? Who will decide what moral means? Also, again, if you put one group against another, as I unfortunately had the opportunity to see over the past few months, you might create a situation where advertisers are becoming even more powerful just because you create an opposition to them.
Yeah.
Right now, there's a bunch of advertisers advertising a bunch of stuff. I actually had the misfortune myself to work in advertising for a while. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the level of potential and professionalism that actually exists amongst advertisers. You know, I don't remember how this, maybe you can help me here, but there's a theory explaining very simply that anything that looks a little bit complicated, you can probably put it on as a result of incompetence. So you give too much credit to advertisers. I think that there's some tools out there that, you know, will probably be regulated by boycott at some point. And in terms of creating a body that checks the morals of any other group, I feel very uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, I'd give a similar answer. I mean, I think working towards regulation isn't necessarily a bad idea, but if you look at how ineffective it can be in certain contexts. So, you know, there's an argument about overspending in the last election, and I think there's quite clear evidence that there was overspending, and the Electoral Commission basically did nothing about that. So I think we should work towards it, but I think probably more important is that we enhance the transparency of the system, so that people are aware of what's being targeted to them and that they can try and at least make some decision for themselves. And one of the things that gives me some optimism about that is that all the different sort of psychological profiling between different people, a trait that's very universal to humans is we don't like being cheated. So there's some really nice experiments showing that across the world, if people are playing a game and someone is cheating, across the world people will pay to punish that person. This sort of goes against what economists normally think, because that's not rational. You're giving up your own money to pay to punish someone else. So I do think we have this inherent, when we see an injustice, when we see that we're being cheated or tricked in some way, I do think there are separation actions that are useful there. In terms of whether I predicted Trump or Brexit and Le Pen, no, of course not.
Especially the uncanny valley comes to mind, and how people universally react extremely aggressively, even if you're not an aggressive person, to having been deceived. So for having spoken to a creature that you thought was a human, and then it turns out to be a non-human, or even like minor differences there. Having spoken to somebody who pretended to be one nationality, whereas he or she was something else. Like, we hate to be, informed that we were wrong, and that kind of ties into the Jonathan Haidt thing here. Like, people don't like to be taught and don't like to be said that, oh, by the way, you've lived your entire life in the wrong concept. But then what do you do when somebody is?
Yeah, so I think Louis trying to bring transparency to what's going on is exactly what's needed.
I think that we have regulators. We don't need a new regulatory body. We have the Information Commissioner's Office, the Electoral Commission. But why are they being so reactive to situations? Why, after Brexit and Trump, did they not immediately launch an investigation into big data's use in elections? Why does it take, like 3 weeks into the election for them to launch that investigation? I think there's a need for people. You don't have to give the data necessarily to the regulators. You just need to give the data to everybody. So, we need to. This is why our data set is open to the LSE, the Bureau of Investigative Journalists. Everybody can analyse it, work it out, and hold the companies that are involved accountable. It's not just that we're working with the Electoral Commission and the Information Commissioner's Office, although we would work with them if they wanted to, if anybody's here from them.
We have a public email address. Yeah, I was just wondering how, because all of you brought up archetypes or kind of metrics in personality, right? That psychologists often criticize, saying that, nobody's ENTJ or neuroticism is a bit more complicated, especially left-wing people know that. It's very interesting that we always have to bring up these archetypes or archetypal thinking, even when we are attacking systems that seem to exploit them. Okay, but maybe somebody in the audience would like to. So I think I will pass the mic around. Can we be that communal? To the gentleman in the blue shirt. That's not a positive reference.
Not go that far.
Yeah.
Yeah?
First off.
Then we will do the recode net type of come forth, ask your question thing.
Hi, so I will be on the campaign trail on Saturday, so all is fine. So the thing I've seen, you said about the competency question, it was really interesting. So I worked with a candidate for the Labour Party in the last election, which was only 2 years ago. 30 years old, but she didn't have a child. Now she has a child. And the thing I have seen for her, she hasn't stood this time, but there was a lot more being
push on Facebook to get her in the campaign. The thing I would say, I would ask all of you is, how social media has evolved in the 2 campaigns. You asked about the Conservatives. Conservatives are a demographic, it's a psychology drove campaign. That's how they use Facebook. Primarily, it'll be which restaurants do you go to, which music do you like on Spotify, what golf clubs do you attend, those kind of things. That's how they ran the operation in 16 for Remain, and that's how they ran operation in 15 in the election.
Well, do you know what Spotify is?
Yeah, you do Spotify, but to be honest, Spotify's penetration above 40 is surprising. But what I would ask you really is, how do you worry about candidates, you went to the congressional level, and forming to gender and ethnic and racial stereotypes in order to be selected, because in our political systems across Europe, that is a much smaller, a much more powerful, so for £500 that can make a big difference, and then to a broader electoral constituency which will range from 50,000 to 100,000. What kind of impact on representation and the people to be elected? As somebody who's done this as a professional hobby of sorts, it is somewhat I worry about.
Give me the mic back, sorry. We are communal, but nevertheless. Yeah.
So on the thing about faces looking competent, there's another study in the US that speaks to this. So in addition to identifying how competent someone looks, you can also identify whether they look more liberal or Republican just from their face. And it turns out that Republican-looking candidates get more votes in Republican-looking states. So I think there is an extent to which certainly people who are more interested in sort of in-group loyalty and conscientiousness are looking for people that fit a certain image. I think also in terms of selection within a party, I think one of the concerns I would also have there is that if it's being selected by the voters in that party, you tend to the people in that party are looking for certain things that might not necessarily be the things that the wider electorate is looking for. So if you have a left-wing Labour candidate who isn't concerned with in-group loyalty and nationalism isn't a big issue for them, their local party could think that they're great, but actually then the general electorate is looking for someone who might say something about nationalism. And I think that might be one of the things that's playing into the sort of polarisation at the moment.
On that subject, you might be interested in a group that exists. It's a combination between Oxford University and Nottingham University. It's called Unbiased, a research group for fairness in algorithm, of which I'm part. There's a lot of conversation around this specific point. Racism and sexism and ageism, all of those are usually coming right into the conversation. I think that there's other aspects to look at as well, and that's what I wanted to hint at the end of the little presentation I was doing. The whole concept of what's a fact and why a person would believe something or not, and what is the background that made this person believe this or not, is actually becoming a very heated reason for hatred, which should be looked into. So we just eliminate people on the basis of what we think they might be voting for, and there's just no conversation possible. This is very dangerous as well. Any idea that you might have about people and why they behave is now becoming extremely simplified, and the simplification is something that I feel very uncomfortable with, which is also why I feel very uncomfortable with the psychometric model of measurement in general, as you mentioned as well. Simplification could be a very serious problem on the long term in terms of how we treat each other. Of course, racism is a very obvious simplification. There are others on the horizon, and I think we should be looking for them as well.
So like kind of a generalized Roman fallacy where arguments no longer matter, right? I mean, this is what we kind of see with the Trump phenomenon.
Not only with the Trump, it's funny. I mean, this is really a general. It's funny that it's always Trump, but I can tell you for sure that it exists on both sides of the spectrum. There seems to be a blind spot where it's very easy to kind of identify the other, but for some reason you never use that. That's a known cognitive bias. You never use the same measurement to measure yourself than the one that you use in order to measure the other.
This is what we kind of discussed with Josh, who's a Newspeak fellow, that all this stuff where you're like, oh my god, conservatives are targeting me on my mobile, blah, blah. But if you're a Labour voter and there is something popping up from the Labour Party, you're like, oh, hi, Jeremy. So it's never like, oh my god, they are tracking into my subconscious and posting me targeted ads. You're like, of course I'm seeing this. Sorry, I skipped you. I'm really sorry.
I don't have a huge amount to add, but it's generally not hello Jeremy. I think out of 150 adverts from the Labour Party, I think 2 featured Jeremy Corbyn. It's quite an interesting insight into that.
As an immigrant, I get 0 Jeremy Corbyn ads, just so you know.
Hi, first I'd like to say 3 really good presentations as an AI guy and someone who's interested in politics. I thought it was all fascinating. I guess I dabble in game theory a bit too. From that point of view, the question of first past the post versus proportional representation is quite interesting. So from a game theory point of view, you might take a strategy that, look, you can just target a particular geography to win and target a particular area to win. You don't really need to go to the broad population. So I guess I'm targeting a couple of you guys here. Sorry, Louis.
Louis.
Do you find that ads are particularly targeted at marginals? Are people using this to target their advertising budget to maximise it to the votes that count? Because a lot of our votes won't count. And to Danielle, sorry, is in this kind of false binary, left versus right, which has often frustrated me. You know, you can't vote green meaningfully unless you're Brighton. A lot of Liberal Democrats in the past, or Liberals in the past, would have got a large vote share but not got any actual candidates. Does this kind of contribute to the polarisation that we're seeing? And do you see that the kind of effect you're seeing of this polarisation is the same in democracies which have more proportional systems? Is it an effect of that game theoretical, a manifestation of that, or is that just sort of irrelevant?
We're definitely seeing increased activity in marginals, and I think it does contribute to the polarisation when you take a particular demographic and only hammer them with one message. So personally, to me, I'm quite young, and I only see messages about get out the vote and student debt, and I'm not aware of anybody else's issues. You know, nobody says, like think about care homes, though. It's quite a long way off, I hope. So, if I'm only exposed to those issues, then I'm assuming everybody else is only being exposed to their separate issues, and the whole country isn't understanding everybody's needs. So I think, yes, to a certain extent, it definitely contributes to the polarisation in politics. Does that answer you?
Yeah, do you see more money? I mean, you've got the demographics go. So you're saying yes, they are targeting the marginals.
Yeah. So before the voter registration deadline, young people were targeted. Right now we're seeing increased activity in the marginals. We're now going through a look at the messaging that people are using in those marginals. So yeah.
Sorry. No, regarding your B-party system versus multiple representation. So I lived in two countries which had proportional representation, Belgium and Israel, both fantastic experience, I recommend it warmly. It's a completely different idea. So in those countries you vote strategically. So you might vote for someone just because it will push the person that you know will win to create the right coalition in your mind. The result of that kind of political system, if there is a situation of life and death, so not in Belgium where nobody cares, actually you get fined if you don't vote there because it's so complicated that it's like a whole day off, you get like a book, you need to go to it doesn't make any sense, so, and you can't not vote, so you get fined, but
there's no government as well.
There's no government for 2 years, nobody noticed because you can. But in Israel there's like a more of a life and death situation, so the result is that most people are extremely politically literate, and they are they just they keep dealing with that stuff. So the level of engagement is just constant. And there's the thing that we have here before the election, the vote for policy. So this is an ongoing thing. So they have like the institute before the election. There's so many parties. You go, you check. Well, that's my opinion. Oh well, apparently I should vote for those religious old people. That's fine, sure. And that's how you play with it. So the question of how I don't know any very large country that has this system. Large countries tend to have more binary or simplistic system, and that's also where you have the biggest market for ads.
And lobbying.
And lobbying.
What you seem to be saying is yes, there are different games that apply depending on the system, but the game's different. You're talking about strategic voting, whereas we have tactical voting, right? But it's still quite sensible.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, just that's from my personal experience, rather than. Sorry. So from my personal experience, like the process of being in an election is very, very different in those three different countries. And it would be very interesting to find out how an advertising system would react to something like that on a large scale. I don't know.
I don't know if Poland qualifies, but we have a proportional system.
Sorry?
I don't know if Poland qualifies as a big country, but we have a proportional system.
Really? That's a big country. It's like 19 million?
Yes, currently 38 million.
38? Who's 90 million? 70 million. No, what? I've been lied to. Someone told me that there's far more people.
No, there's 40 million around the whole world of Poland.
Alright, okay. And do you have like those big ads thing?
To be honest, last election I was surprised how little.
Yeah.
Most of this is more like individual politicians or political parties have profiles on Facebook, and you like them, and you see your friends liking them and sharing and something like that. But sponsored, like I see this sponsored posts, I see very little of them.
Yeah.
But I think it may change in the next election. Maybe we lag a bit. So I will be very enthusiastic to be prepared for this next election. Yes.
Can I just quickly add on the proportional representation? So when you look across countries of the world, indeed, when you have proportional systems, you see more smaller countries. And if you look at how people, and then turnout is also higher. So proportional systems tend to lead to higher turnout. And people themselves say that the sort of underlying psychological mediator of that tends to be people's perceived sense of efficacy or control over the system. So particularly if you vote for a smaller party, you have a larger sense of perceived efficacy in your political process and are more likely to vote.
I'm just going to think that in game theory, the level of information is of key importance, right? So people make decisions based on their information level that they are at.
And this is what's really interesting now, because we're seeing with the internet, you're getting this whole feedback loop.
Yes.
People seeing one thing, then voting one way, and then the feedback loop's changing, and you're getting all this chaotic oscillation, and the poll guys are just like, what's going on?
Exactly, the reception horizon is constantly shifting, right? And I think that's where the lobbying and this whole advertising industry in, for example, the US around politics is interesting, because it shifts the level of information of the vote.
Which is where, again, the transparency thing is like a huge thing if you can get it to market quickly enough.
Yeah.
Again, I'm just going to jump in the blue shirt. Oh my God. So blue shirt, and then person in a blue t-shirt and a blue cardigan.
I don't really need this.
I can talk more than loudly enough. Does anyone in the back not hear me?
I got first interested in politics more than 40 years ago. And one of the first things I learned is that it's not really important to persuade people in the middle to vote for your party. It's important to get your guys out to the polls. And so we put a lot of effort into arranging for people to get rides to the polling stations and to phone them and remind them. This is in the days when phones were fastened to the wall, to remind them to go to vote. And it seems to me that what you're saying now is very much the same thing. And what counts is who's on your team and getting them to vote, and discouraging the people from the other team to register to vote, etc. But I've also learned since then that I'm very much a swing voter. And I've voted for all three of our major parties in the last 20 years since I've been living back in the UK. And I'm wondering what your message has for the swing voters, because it seems that there are fewer of them, and the suggestion is that more of them are being co-opted into one camp or the other. Is that the case, or are they still out there and just not being talked to and not being counted? And what can be done to make more people swing voters? And do you want your microphone back? There was somebody. Well, yeah, for the answers.
The other gentleman.
You did hear me, didn't you?
And then we will. Oh, well, just she said that. Is it a very unreasonable, or sorry, what was it, like non-factious thing to ask people who are about to ask questions to come forward?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
This is not a pre-selection thing, just so that you're closer to the microphone.
So this is something the Audit of Political Engagement look at every year. So the Audit of Political Engagement look at the extent to which people strongly identify with a political party or not. So just post 2015, there was a bit of a peak in the extent to which people strongly identify with a political party, but it seems to have dropped a little bit since then. But you're right. I mean, I've been involved in political campaigns also, and the emphasis of those is just, find out who's voting for you and make sure they turn up and vote on election day. I think increasingly the more we learn about the psychology of politics, I think political parties might be trying more and more to sort of think about trying to persuade people on the other side. Particularly if, for example, your demographics might fit a Labour voter, so say, you're working class or you're younger, but their psychological profile might really care about in-group loyalty and really care about threat sensitivity, then actually that's a voter that the Conservatives could potentially, target and win over. There's been a recent study in the US highlighting that a brief amount of contact with someone from a trans community can actually change people's opinions on a sort of issue like that. So if you've got a really issue-based election like that, this derives very clearly from psychological theory, contact theory, that one of the main mediators of some predictors of prejudice is just whether you've made contact with the people that you're concerned about. So I think the more we learn about political psychology, I think political parties may get increasingly savvy about actually trying to, target voters from the other side.
Yeah. Unfortunately, due to my lack of having lived very long, I haven't actually voted in an election before. so I can't talk from 40 years of experience. But I think from looking at my own social media feeds, it's definitely important to get out of your bubble. More so if you're a swing voter. I guess that's your biggest influence. Going to be your bubble if you're a swing voter. And my generation is the most militant, I think. And they're quite like, get on board and like my party, or we don't want to hear from you. So I think it's just important for people to understand the other side, and I don't think they always do, especially with Facebook. I think targeted advertising contributes to that. So yeah.
I love swing voters. Well, I suppose. Yes. So I was saying I really love swing voters. I think it's a fantastic and fabulous thing. It's really sad that there's less and less of them. And I think that frankly, we're talking about party politics. There's a hint that just looking at the past few elections, whatever division existed before become less and less relevant. So we are in an era where defining what the politics are about is occurring everywhere in the transition phase. So there's a great opportunity for the swing voters to actually set the agenda in terms of what are the politics about nowadays. The whole thing of, the economy versus, you look at the party's manifesto, it's really similar. You need to really kind of find, you need to really make a huge effort to understand why is that even, I've just read now, Labour voters are now, middle-aged white people from the cities, and it turns out that the Tories are targeting like the working classes and kind of winning in Scotland. What the hell is happening? It's just not really looking the same as it used to. If there was an activism needed, I think it's an activism for the center. And in terms of political psychology, there's a huge challenge in understanding what that means. So what's the center? What is the agenda of the center? How is that different from any other agenda? And then how do you define a way to get that message out, since swing voters are usually people who get, not super excited about stuff because, it's the center, right? So it just would be interesting to have a little bit more thinking around that front. It's quite new. We don't really know. I have my own personal opinion that there's something happening between globalism and localism that's redefining one of the axes of politics that maybe wasn't really the case before, or it was the case in a different manner. There might be new axes. Someone needs to go and find out what those axes are and who's the center now, and then what this center should do in order to kind of create a legacy. Right?
Yeah, being an Eastern European, I think we are very familiar with the fact that we have, an authoritarian right-wing majority that is economically left-wing and protectionist, and then you have a left-wing social democrats minority who are economically progressive liberals. And this is kind of, I don't know if you guys have questions about this, but I think it kind of takes us back to the AI question and whether algorithms will be a little bit better at figuring out what the hell is going on just by having a better understanding of the scope of data available, whereas we have politicians who have literally no idea, and why would we consider them authorities? There was somebody at the last AI event who mentioned a politician who literally doesn't know how to attach a file to an email. So how would that person be a repository of information? How would that person have more information about the current world than you?
It's so patient.
That's okay, thank you. I have to say thank you so much for coming. It's been super interesting to look at. My question is actually about something I suspect is true, but it might be wrong. And it sounds like most of you guys and most of the people in this audience are sort of left of centre, liberal, or people with liberal sympathies. That's not necessarily a problem.
So judgmental. Using this architect.
I'm a comedian.
He's profiling us, guys.
that's not necessarily a problem, obviously. But don't get me wrong. But my concern was actually about, say, your efforts to bring more transparency, more openness about the algorithms. It seems to be led by people like you, right? People in your profile, just relatively young, definitely highly educated, relatively well off. By association, doesn't that make
Unpopular? Yeah.
not just unpopular, but the efforts that you guys are, the very worthy efforts that you guys are doing, by association, doesn't it taint that to the point where we have the same issues with trust with the media, where this is seen as a bit of a left-wing plot? And not going to conspiracy theories, it seems like the people doing this are from a certain background. So how do we make sure that people who are not like us care about this as well?
How do we ensure that there is a dialogue?
Yeah, and that the efforts that you guys are doing, there's more people backing that outside of this bubble.
So at least on the political psychology front, it's definitely not just a hunch. People have quantified, how many conservatives and liberals there are in the field of political psychology and social psychology more generally. It used to be relatively balanced, so for every sort of 2 liberals, you'd have 1 conservative in the 50s, and now it's sort of 1 conservative for every 15 liberals. So that's definitely a problem for the field of psychology more generally, and there's a lot of psychological research which, this sort of heightened threat sensitivity on the right sort of stuff. It can come across a bit patronising and a bit sort of, the right are clearly, overly fearful and that sort of thing. I mean, I would emphasise that, maybe that research shows the left aren't always as threat sensitive as they need to. So Jonathan Haidt, who has been plugged a number of times this evening, who I would regard as one of the leading political psychologists in the world, in addition to writing stuff about the righteous mind and the way in which morality can influence how we might vote, he set up something called the Heterodox Academy, which is a sort of academic society to try and bring together people across the political spectrum and to ensure sort of openness across the political spectrum. I think that's a really noble aim. I happened to have a third year project student last year who was the chair of the UCL Conservative Society, and as soon as I learned that he was chair of the Conservative Society, I jumped him as a project student, because we really learned a lot from that dialogue and collaboration. I think it's really important. Yeah, he was my only Conservative student.
It's a huge problem in the US, right, where if you're certain right-wing thinkers, you're not allowed into a university campus, or you are chased off and assaulted, which considered to be a less liberal thing. I don't know. But
Yeah,
that's me. Sorry.
Haidt says there's a sort of tolerance of every sort of diversity,
Yeah.
except diversity in opinion.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
I wouldn't assume we're all left. I'm pursuing transparency and I'm young, so it probably looks like I am. I mean, on paper, I don't have a partisan view just because of the project. But I think it's important to encourage people from all aspects of the political spectrum to get on board. It's why we work with people like The Sun. We're trying to get people like the Daily Mail to publish our stories, because I think transparency is in everybody's interest. But we have found it certainly a challenge to get those kinds of audiences on board. And from looking at our statistics, where the Green Party is some days polling higher than the Conservative Party, of course it appears that those groups are more engaged in our efforts than other groups. So yeah, just some analysis.
What do you think, what do you think about this cheating thing that you mentioned? For example, if somebody has been fed fake news, would they respond passionately to the fact that when they find out that their agenda might have been formed by having been fed fake news, or it's just a reality media conspiracy?
Well, I don't know. If you're fed fake news and you believe it, you probably try to back it up, right? The first thing you do is try to deny that you were ever wrong. I mean, maybe that's just me opening up about myself, but I think that would be a normal response. Yeah.
I've been asked to be a bit provocative, so I'm going to quote.
You proposed.
Yeah. I mean, it's about politics, right? So one part, how is it called? One nation conservatism, the Israeli idea, right? The idea is that there's a ruling class of gentlemen that privilege, they have education, they are mobile, which is probably one of the other divide that we should be looking at in the future. Because they are more privileged, it's their responsibility to not reject the other. There has been a rejection by the ruling class of the other. In that sense, it's usually poor people that have right-wing ideas. And every solution that has been put forward is representing the ideas and interests of the ruling class, which is now the left-wing educated, mobile class. It's very difficult from the psychological point of view to understand the other. It's just not going to happen. There are a few things that might be helpful, which is why I was mentioning before this idea that we've been fed fake news or facts, fake news. The only people that are angry about that are the people who think that facts are that important. There's a completely different range of the population. They don't care about if something is right or wrong, right? This is just a reality, and this is 50% of the population. You can't just reject 50% of the population. There needs to be a new notion
of absorbing new language, new worldviews that are very different
to the one that we, that I suppose a lot of people here believe in. There's one thing I would like to. So there's this one. So I have some background in linguistics. This one guy who's a sociolinguistic Lavrov. He was doing the analysis of interaction between people. And he said there's one way to make sure that if you're the person that speaks, you will be given the right to speak again and again. And that if you just mention that you might be talking about sex, death, and moral indignation. So I just want to put forward that maybe...
so simple.
No, sex, death, and moral indignation. You talk about sex, death, and moral indignation, suddenly everybody wants to talk to you. Maybe the way to just think about politics now is not to talk about politics. It's not about educating the other side. It's about just being entertaining, whatever. I mean, we need to look at completely different areas that we're very not comfortable with, but mostly because, someone needs to say something for the Tories here. This idea of responsibility, because we're privileged, is probably means that as liberal, we should be the one making the effort because we have more power. So we should be the one making the effort of understanding the other and stop calling them fascist and racist. And if they don't like us, we should sit down and just listen. Why is that the case? Maybe they have a point. I'm just saying.
Yes, sorry, I totally agree. Calling the Donald Reddit group 37 million psychopaths is a bit dangerous. Okay, so we have time for one more question. So we will do 2 questions, and you guys have to remember the questions, okay? So who are the 2 questions? You already asked something, and you said something as well, so that's...
Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
So a question, something added to an earlier question, and another question.
Something to try to frame my question. For all of what's being said, is there not also a positive view we can have in what's happening? Basically that there is a disruption of party politics, whereby basically we've noticed that non-selected candidates were those who were winning, basically because of social media dynamics, as we've seen with Trump or Macron in the other end. Trump was not the trendy party politics candidate, and he won because of social medias. So there is a sort of a disruption where the message goes through without normal medias, and I think that's where we were trying to say, well, the old system where journalists were setting the tone are now over. I mean, this time is over. And right now, as a person, I'm currently running as a candidate in France, in north of Paris, and Facebook ads allows me to reach a large amount of voters, which I could not be able to reach without the same budget. So you have a disruption of the whole political party system in all countries, I think, and probably this might lead to greater democracy and greater debate. That's my question. Yeah.
So you're running in Paris even though you live in the UK?
That's right now.
That's only with Facebook. Only with Facebook.
Hello. First, I want to say that at least in terms of this audience being only left wing, I can assure that at least I am more of a libertarian with a bit, if I will be completely honest, a bit right wing leaning. So I'm not alone.
Can I start?
But I would like to say that first of all, this is exactly what I was been looking for some time in my own country. That trying to antagonize each other is poor effort, and to be honest, there's something I'm thinking about self-labeling, that there are some probably axes of choices in politics that I don't have a clear opinion. I'm not knowledgeable enough. I just don't know enough. But since my people, friends who are libertarians have an opinion, I just mimic them. And in the same way, I think it's liberals, right wings, that there's this polarization because both sides have opinion what each label means. We have an opinion what right wing means. Both left wing, both right wingers have some opinion what right wingers means, and left wingers have some opinion what right wingers means. They're usually completely different. And I think this, all of this is a great effort. And some of the thing I would like to also think about is research each other. How do we identify? Because maybe I'm saying you're a libertarian, maybe you're saying you're liberal, and our axes are almost identical. We just some cosmetic differences. So this is the thing that. Also, I really about this question of liberals stealing the thunder in the terms of on doing transparency. I think that just should encourage us. I mean, libertarians, right wingers, or whoever else, that we should just jump ahead and do this also. We should all fight for transparency. We should all fight. We should all fight. We should organize together. We should work separately. It doesn't matter. But the most important thing is that the facts should not become belonging of one political party, and we should call out bullshit on people from our side too. This is very hard. I personally have a big problem when somebody on politics I like says something stupid. It's very hard for me to say, okay, that was idiotic. I'm not writing, but I think this is the only way we can improve. And I think your ideas are a great job, and maybe in the future we can encompass it in my country too. Thank you very much. Who should I give mic to?
If you are super quick, I will let you go
I'll try. I'm not as loud as this gentleman, but I'll try and get it out. I'm in a lot of trouble actually for being here tonight because I'm meant to be knocking on doors and campaigning. I'm actually
You're also a conservative?
No, I'm not a conservative at all. Complete opposite. I'm a Labour councillor in Bloomsbury, and I'm really interested in this because I represent about 1,000, 1,500 students in my ward who don't register anymore. So I'm really interested in the aspects of this, of how we can use it to get people to.
Another gentleman behind you as well.
That's no problem.
We noticed a couple of we noticed a couple of trends from real world politics that when you're knocking on doors, there's a couple of things I want to throw out there for them to just debate and toy with. The thing we know that predicts the way people vote tends to be the way your family votes and the way you voted in the past. The Lib Dems make a big thing of this. If they've made 8 contacts with you, they feel that you will then vote Lib Dem for the rest of your life, and they play on this. And on this, we can't be sure ever how successful targeting is, because unlike with a product or any other advertising or sales campaign, you know when a product's bought. Here, you can't really be sure. I mean, you don't, and so you can't really tell. How sure are you that ends up in people voting in the way that you expect them to do? And my second point that I'd just like to throw out there is, I do a lot of work with young people in our borough in Camden in schools. And a lot of the young generation now don't use Twitter or Facebook at all, and don't use any of these political things. So they're completely exempt from all this advertising as well.
Can you blame them?
No, not at all. I mean, the fact that when they're recruited in jobs, everyone's looking at everything they've done. Snapchat. Well, indeed, and the adverts. I don't know whether you can track the adverts on that, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. But also, just to end on, how can we get more people to register to vote? Because I think that's the bit that really upset me in the last US election, where you had sort of people telling people lies about what day people voted and things like that. I just thought that was really wrong.
You have to be super quick. It has to be on high tweets, okay? Tweets.
Yeah, great set of presentation,
I'm taking
everyone.
notes, guys, don't worry.
I have a question regarding the tracking project. Is there a reason why you haven't tracked the searches as well because I think they are correlated with the ads you get shown on Facebook. At least they were for me. For example, I saw some political ads based on things I searched on Google. And I think not having that signal isn't fully representative as a sample. And I was wondering whether there were privacy issues or whether there were other considerations for not tracking that. Thank you.
I'm not going to write down this question because I didn't understand it. Okay, so we have 4 questions. One was I think we've already covered it, so disruption of party politics and labels no longer meaning anything. I just springs in. So we have a
totally changing economic and political and demographic spectrum. Identity has changed, the other has changed. Everybody is an individual and can be whatever they want to be. How do you define themselves? And then it leads really nicely to the second question, which is about self-identification. Are we identifying politically, self-identifying correctly? Or as Daniela said, I really like this idea of Israel is looking at policies and looking at, okay, what do I think? What is the actual politician who corresponds to what I think, instead of identifying the same thing all our lives? Yes, so very proactive, right? And less swung by advertising. And the third question was whether targeting works. And the fourth question, I did not understand it, but I'm probably just tired. Google searches versus Facebook. I don't know. I'm pretty sure my Facebook is tracking my Google. I have proof for that.
Everybody who stayed, you are our heroes because it's 40 degrees and you are super positive to making the world a better place. You get extra beers, okay? It's in the fridge. You get 2 beers per person.
Okay, so the first question was, is party politics dead? I think the internet by design is empowering, and this Trump using Twitter or the nature that you can reach any audience relatively cheaply these days certainly means that you don't need your party to back you up. We're seeing this in the Conservatives are generally pushing Theresa May as Theresa May. You're not voting for the Conservatives, you're voting for Theresa May. Like 90% of the advertising features Theresa May, as opposed to the alternative where Labour less than 1% of the advertising features Jeremy Corbyn.
But native does.
Native?
Yeah. Native, why you have an impact article that looks a little bit like
an article. Yeah.
By the way, it's really funny that in terms of the self-labeling, you haven't voted yet, which is like amazing. You're a political virgin, but you have a political identity already, even though it hasn't been actually performed yet.
I mean, well, we're a week away. I think it's good to form an opinion. I hope so. I'd say all the evidence supports that leaders rather than parties are being empowered by this digital revolution. And the other point, so young people aren't using social media, and so is this not a problem because they're not using Facebook and Twitter? Well, the Tory party prides themselves on sending out thousands of direct mail outs that are targeted to you. So, I think the number from 2015 was something like 3,000 individually tailored physical letters based on, do you support the Marines or the NHS or, whatever it was that they were advertising on. I wasn't voting at the time. Nobody is safe from targeting. Big data is going to get you, whether you're on Facebook, you're on Twitter, you're on Google, you're an old lady sitting in her home thinking that this letter is written by Theresa May herself. Targeted messaging will get you. So, no, you're not safe. And the other point, Google. So I had the privilege of reading some unpublished paper, but it was an analysis of Google advertising not Google advertising, Google search ranking, which is possibly not what you're talking about, but still an interesting point. And they took like 100 swing voters, showed them search results, and saw what kind of an impact Google could have on their searching. And they worked out that given 10 searches, you can swing somebody's vote pretty accurately by about, over 50%, less than 60%. And so when you adjust that and you put that over a period of time, like 3 months leading up to an election, that's a huge influence that you as a corporation, Google have. So whether they're in talks with Facebook, whether the advertising is the same, is unknown. We don't track any of the Google activity. We're pretty much exclusively Facebook and exclusively adverts. We don't track the articles or anything. So I can't really answer your other question, but I hope that says something.
Pretty sure though that the Facebook ads price didn't go up because they were campaigning for don't go to vote. It was because Facebook was smart enough to raise the price.
We're working.
That's for later tweet.
No, we're very quickly. We're working with a group to try and determine whether advertising bots are being used to drive up the price of advertising. So, for example, Party A could drive up the price of Party B's adverts if they know where they're targeted. So we're looking into that at the moment, but no concrete.
Watch out, Facebook.
So I wanted to pick up this question as whether there's a cause for optimism or something positive we can say about this. And so one of the reasons I highlighted that voting study in terms of Facebook with this message saying, you know, I voted today. Actually, the message that was effective was when I voted came with an image of all of your friends who also clicked on that message. So actually, although these companies have enormous power, actually, you know, we go on Facebook because we're going to see our friends there, because we're going to see our family there. And there was an initial, you know, thought that maybe the increase in polarization was happening because of the filter bubbles we were seeing on social media. Actually, the polarization seems to be highest amongst older demographics who are less likely to be using social media. And there's actually counter-evidence that actually on social media, if your friends share something that you disagree with, you actually might be a bit more likely to read it. So I think actually there's a social development, there's a social aspect to this that could be more empowering if we attempted to make more use of it.
To your question about how to target people effectively, so you might want to check the work of Walid Ghani. He used to be the head of the campaign for Obama 2012, and he's I think head of data science at Chicago University. So this guy found how to elect Obama again. It wasn't really a clear cut, if you remember, before the 2012 election. We had some really cool, it was really scary until it became really scary 4 years later. Anyway, counterintuitively, the best way to target people is not to only, the way he did it, wasn't through online ads. It was through local newspaper. Such a creative way to think about stuff. I really love this guy so much.
So progressive.
I was just so intimidated. You can huge tank and have water. Anyway, so the guy, what he did is the following. He made an analysis of the local newspaper everywhere in the US and found which one are the influencers in each very local community. That's the equivalent of going door to door and kind of knocking at the door. Only you use the internet to target the one guy that's going to be effective in just going and knock on other people's door. So there's some digital stuff going on there, but ultimately, as we mentioned earlier as well, it's all about real people. That's how really you get to convince about anything. It's cheap. Well, I don't know how much it cost them, but or whomever financed them. But the point is that ultimately, just the real person is probably the one that's going to influence you the most. So of course, seeing your friend's face is really important, but if you can target in a local community the one person that has the potential to influence the other person, that you use your money really nicely. So that's to your question. And there was another question about self-tests in psychology. I went to study psychology because I wanted to understand how groups of people work, and I was a bit disappointed to find out that indeed a lot of the stuff that we're doing has to do with tests, which are very not natural. I don't know if you try, even the psychometric tests, you try to just do those tests. That doesn't really happen in nature, right? You just sit down, they ask you, do you like to be in the center of the group or like on the side of the group? I don't know. And all the questions are like that, and it's just so awkward and weird, and at the end you just, want to get it over with. So this is actually a frontier of artificial intelligence. The reliability of what people answer in tests is as good as it can for now, but if there was another way to find out what people think instead of just asking them, it would be awesome, because it seems like it's just not working that well. So there's a whole range of other problems with that. It's not only about the questionnaires. The pollsters are not really successful in predicting the outcome of elections. That is also related to the way people ask questions when they do the polls. So, so my personal opinion on that is that it's going to be solved in the next few years with natural language processing. Don't believe the hype, even if it was on Black Mirror. We're very far away from solving that problem. We don't know enough about human language and the subtleties of it to even start teaching a computer how to even look at it. We don't understand human language, but one day, hopefully as far in the horizon as possible, we will be able to do some of it, and then it means that we will be able to really understand what people say, and we won't need to ask them questions anymore. We just need to listen to them as humans do to one another. But we're really not there. And if people tell you that they're doing it, then be suspicious, because it's really very, very difficult. The greatest are trying and they haven't succeeded.
I absolutely agree, and maybe I think it's going to be a little bit earlier than that. The AI targeting is definitely coming, and we will be even more, or they will try to enclose us into our filter bubbles and political compartments, echo chambers, even more. So I think dialogue would be the number one responsibility, and that's uniquely human. That's something that no artificial intelligence agent can take away from you. So if you are a human and you feel responsible for your society, talk to people who think differently, and that can be more powerful than any algorithm. Maybe that could be the positive message. If you disagree, please just tweet me, but send it to Newspeak House. Thank you so much for coming, and amazing questions. You guys are the Bear Grylls of Newspeak House. We would like to reward you with a fridge full of whatever